Welcome to the WellCast. The world has a lot to say. We're bringing a biblical perspective to those conversations.
Welcome back to another WellCast. We are glad that you are joining us today. I'm joined here with my co-host, Melissa.
Yes, I am here.
Melissa.
Glad to be back.
The melodic here is nice for all the ear.
Here I am.
Here I am, Lord.
Here I am, Lord.
And we are joined as well by our friend Dave Obwald.
The one and only Dave.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today, man.
Thanks for having me back.
We are in a series where we are just talking about things that we think are important with people who we want to talk to about them.
The things.
It actually really rolls off the tongue.
That's our series.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be on a shirt.
Front and back.
Yeah. Dave,
What Jordan said is, we wanted to talk about this topic, and that's why you're here.
Yeah. We think it's important, and we're talking today about conflict resolution, what God's heart for peacemaking is, all these above, mostly just conflict. And I brought you here today because I have an issue with you. No, I'm just kidding. I want to do this in real time, actually.
I'll mediate.
Honestly, that would probably be a very entertaining podcast.
Yeah. Dave, I think, we've talked about this at some point in the past on this podcast, but it's a very real topic for every person in the world all the time. And so we thought it would be important to bring back, but also just for anybody who doesn't know, who are you?
Who are you?
Who are you? What do you do here at the Well? And then also, what's your sort of this is a passion area for you.
Yeah.
And so how'd you get there?
Yeah, so I've been on staff here at the Well for 15 years, done a number of different things, but in the last probably 10 years, I've found myself in the groups world and specifically within what we call our regeneration recovery world, which even recovery itself is a co-opted word, but just means people that have issues in any way, shape, or form and want to slow down the gospel in their lives for a season. So I have loved that.
As you said, intentional discipleship disguised as a 12-step recovery program.
Yeah. And so I think, I tell people all the time that walking through recovery for myself has meant that I didn't think I could be a Christian and still work at a church. And really walking through my own recovery in Christ has allowed for that. And then I just love getting to walk side of other people. I do individual care and counseling stuff as well as part of what I do here, and then get to raise 5 great kids. I got ones in college now, all the way to 5th graders. And then why it's a passion topic, I think it's probably just like every other usually thing I get passionate about. I'm pretty bad at it. And so I found myself in working at a university a long time ago and realizing that I was starting to hear about God's heart for conflict and realizing, oh my gosh, I've avoided conflict my entire life, and my entire marriage. And I want to run away and I want to avoid, and that has not gone great. And so I started to hear how dealing with conflict the way Jesus invites us to can be massively transformative. And I started to witness it in groups of people that were, guiding me in that and going, I need more. And so it really started me on a journey personally. And then that ended up being a journey, vocationally with education and all those things. And now it's a passion area for me now to enter in with other people, because I believe that God uses conflict as a gift and opportunity. Sometimes, it's like the gift of desperation. God usually gets our attention best when things aren't going well, both in our own lives, recovery stuff, right?
Yeah.
But also in our interpersonal relationships. When things are on autopilot, we can kind of just get by, and go, well, that's good enough. But when, say, in a marriage or in parenting or whatever, there's a blip on the radar, and conflict is one of those blips on the radar. It's a gift and opportunity to grow in Christ likeness, to serve another person, to look more like Jesus. It's not the way we would choose it.
Yeah.
But God uses it. And so that's why I'm passionate about it.
I think I heard you say it's our constant opportunity.
Yeah, it's our constant opportunity.
What does that mean? Because most people are like, it's my constant burden.
Yeah, no thank you.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, I think it's just reframing how we see anything in life, right? And so usually we reframe things that happen in our lives that are what we would call bad. We usually label conflict as a bad thing, And I think when we go into it and labeling it that way, usually we're going to get out of it bad stuff. And just like anything else in our life, when we face a struggle, we face a trial, James 1 talks about, hey, blessed are you when you face that stuff. And actually, God uses it to develop your character, to perseverance, and that stuff's the long haul of like formation in Christ likeness. And so, constant opportunity, meaning when I face a conflict, all kinds of good stuff can come from it. Yeah, hard stuff can come from it too, but we're usually not looking for the good stuff, as much as we are aware that the bad stuff could happen.
Yeah. And
This matters so much for those of you that go to the Well, we even have this on our leadership application.
Yeah.
We care deeply about how you handle conflict or kind of where you lean in conflict.
Yeah.
And I feel like what you've taught us all is you've given us words to put to how we walk through conflict. So maybe you could give a little bit of that.
The language we use around here is we've kind of adopted from a Peacemakers Ministries, is a great resource for people that want more. But in their book, The Peacemaker, they use this language of either being a peace breaker or a peace faker. That, Jesus is the embodiment of peacemaking, where he embodies grace and truth, love and truth. We as humans tend to slip off one end or the other, more towards grace, but kind of lack truth. That would be the idea of a peace faker, and that's how I'm wired on a bad day. Where a peace faker is going to be someone who's going to look nice. They're going to come across usually like looking loving, looking kind in a conversation, those kind of things, but often will avoid bringing up the real issues. Will avoid dealing with the thing that needs to be dealt with. And usually then we'll go away from that conversation or that situation and just build resentments and beat people up in their heads and wish they could have the courage to have the conversation. And so that was me. I mean, I just had a truckload of, undealt with resentments.
Just ammo against all the people in your life.
Right? And it would always be just this lens that I looked at people through as resentments, because I was unwilling to, because I feared the breaking of relationship, and I feared that I was going to hurt somebody. So I just avoided it, right? So peace faker, and it's not true peacemaking, and it's very destructive, right? And then on the flip side, people can lean towards being peace breakers, where they're going to bring up the issue. You have, if you've done something wrong to them, you're going to know about it. But how they bring it up is going to be in a way that often breaks relationship. It comes across competitive, win-loss. It comes across mean sometimes, mean-spirited. And they're, on a bad day, going to look to win versus look to resolve. And
that's what I was thinking, kind of, I want to be right, not I want to be restored,
I don't
right?
Yes. And in that, they'll think they're doing well by like, I'm not avoiding this. We're just talking. We're just talking. And but in that, people start to fear them, or people start to cower to them, versus actually meet resolution and or like they want to avoid them in it breaks relationship.
Yeah, I'm more worried about like you understanding what you've done.
Yes.
And maybe not even repentance, but sort of like me exacting judgment.
Yes.
Than actually creating resolution and peace.
Right.
Yeah. And there is I think the peace faker does the same thing, but in their head.
Yes.
Right? Consistently and over time.
Yeah.
And I mean, okay. If you are like living as a Christian, devoted to Christ, like, would people assume that, well, yeah, you won't have any conflict then?
Could people assume that?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because when we come to know Jesus, everything just gets perfect and easy, and like people sprinkle us with fairy dust, and we never have to live as humans. No, it's just unrealistic, right?
Yeah.
The assumption is, in this world you will face trouble, and Jesus' assumption, the entire New Testament is written to people who are Christians who are facing conflict with one another, because we're living in our flesh. And so, there's nowhere to go where you're not going to experience conflict.
Yeah.
Okay.
Church included.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, like I would say most people functionally act like surprised.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
So how do you, what does it actually look like to expect that there will be like this, like things are going to go, sin is going to affect a relationship in some way as people interact, especially if you have deep relationships, right?
Yeah.
How do people live not like everyone is going to possibly be a conflict, but with the expectation that, hey, this is probably going to happen at some point, and I want to be prepared, you know?
I mean, in some ways, it's exactly what you said. I mean, I think it is the lens I take on anything, life, parenting. I just got back we went on an exposure trip to Thailand. And one of the things we did ahead of time with our team is go, hey, when we get stressed, when we face like being frustrated with another, feeling blocked by one another in some way, shape, or form, or get squeezed, what is going to naturally come out of us? Hey, let's talk about it ahead of time. Let's be aware that it's going to happen, because then we won't be surprised. And I think when we act surprised is the problem, right? Because if I know, oh, of course, I'm married, that means I'm going to have conflict because I'm living with someone who's other. And who has a different style and bent and has different desires at times and has different ways they want to do life at times, then if I'm not surprised, I go, okay, what's the gift and opportunity in this? And if I can have that mindset, I mean, that's literally a James 1 mindset. Everything in the kingdom has the potential to be converted into a gift and opportunity. Everything. But I could just label it as bad, right? And I could go, oh man, my wife's the problem. And if she would just change, you know, whatever it is. We have the chance to grow in intimacy if we deal with the conflict well. We have the chance to grow as a team if we face a conflict and actually move through it. Deeper understanding, the ability to work through hard things. Like there's so many gifts attached to it, but it really does take a mindset and a way of looking at the world that's not surprised.
Yeah.
Like, of course, we're colleagues. We're going to face conflict. Yeah. Okay. What we do with it matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you asked that question, I was thinking about when you do premarital counseling, and we had a mentor that when they did it, you know, they brought up conflict while you were dating before you were married, and the couple looked at each other like, well, we'll never fight. We're in love. Well, they kept the counseling going after for the first 3 months to then go, what was your first fight like? And let's talk through those conflict patterns, because they knew there was a little bit of that, you know, puppy love in the beginning. So same thing. We're Christians. We're in the church. We should love each other and we'll never have conflict. Oh, there is conflict. What? Okay. So I just brush it under the rug, or what do I do? So.
And on a bad day, I just change churches.
Yeah. Or
I just
that.
leave my life group.
That got hard. So I'm running out and finding something different.
Because everyone has a pattern of how they dealt with it growing up in childhood. And we, on a bad day, will live out that same pattern in our new relationships, a marriage, a church, a life group, whatever it is. And so if we're unaware, most people walk through life unaware of their conflict patterns. Everyone has one.
Yeah.
Are you aware of yours? And if you're not, you're hurting the people around you with your unawareness.
How do you gain awareness of those things?
Well, part of that is, you know, just starting to have language around it. Part of that is mapping your life. Okay, when I faced conflict in my family of origin, what did I do? Like for me, family of origin, when conflict came up, you know, when dad was disappointed in me or there was tension in the home, I went outside and played basketball. And I shot hoops for hours because I wanted to avoid going back inside. At Grandma and Grandpa's house, when Grandma and Grandpa yelled at each other, there was a tree outside that I would go sit in for an hour.
Wow.
I'm like, ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
What's my current tree that I go sit in, right? It's maybe not a physical tree, but it is a way that I avoid wanting to actually deal with it. And I go, oh, I never brought up anything hard to my parents ever. I never addressed anything with my sister that I was frustrated about my entire upbringing. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's probably what I'm doing as an adult. And so if I don't do that kind of like searching, you know, kind of when God talked about search your heart, know if there's any grievous way, any off way in us, lead us in a way that is more righteous, right? A way of loving God and loving others that's more in line with the gospel. But if I've never done a searching of my life and heart to know what is out of alignment there, because that's not in alignment with the gospel. But if I don't look at it, I can't actually like surrender that to the Lord and move towards what is more righteous.
And that's tricky and hard because it could look, as an avoider, it could look like you're trying to have peace or
Dude, everyone thought I was
not-
nice.
right?
Yeah.
Well, and I read a
So
quote
forgiving.
somewhere that said avoiding conflict doesn't keep the peace, it keeps the tension.
Mm.
And that was like a gold quote because and I thought that. So I lean on peace breaker.
Mm.
I know I do.
It's all right,
But
though.
I thought, oh, well, Jesus looks much more like this over here. So I guess it means don't bring stuff up. Take it to the Lord. Don't be a nag, right? And then the resentment came, and now I'm a peace faker. What is that in the middle where you talked about that I can have both? I can walk into conflict and not have it be all grace, all truth, but somewhere there. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with some of my leaders recently where we were talking through a conflict, and there are some things that I feel like you've taught me, or maybe just the staff, or that have now become like second language type stuff. And I walked one of them through these things just naturally. And she was just like, okay, well, what's your advice on this thing? And I said, okay, stuff like, hey, keep the circle small. Own your whatever percent, right? Don't assume or don't fill in the gaps, right? You know how we say like stay confused, right? Don't fill in the gaps. And I mentioned something like, well, she was like, where do you know all these things? And I was like, oh, like we've done, conflict training and things like that. She's like, conflict training? How do I know? How do I get that? And I think like one, that question that she has is at the heart of all, like, I don't think anybody who knows the heart of Christ doesn't want to live in tension with people around them.
Yeah.
He is peace embodied, right? And when you know him, you want to be an agent of his peace to the world, right? That's what we are. We are agents of God's reconciliation, according to Scripture. And like, but we just don't know. Like you said, we have family, environment that shapes us, personality that shapes us. We have negative examples in the world around us, right? Literally, like media cycles, they thrive on conflict and unresolved conflict, right?
Yep.
So I would be interested in just this next piece. Like, what are some sort of like basic level, like if somebody's listening to this and they're like, well, I would desire that, but I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
What are some sort of basic level handles we can give people as, hey, walking out the morning, maybe they listen to this podcast and walking out the door this morning, me and my wife got into it and this is the 10th time this week, right?
Yeah.
And now we're just going to go home and kind of act like nothing happened.
Yeah.
Let's give these people between that and maybe, 10-year unresolved, like big stuff. How do we start thinking about this stuff?
Yeah, super good. So, man, first things that come to mind, and I'll just take that example of like recent conflict happened. What do I do with it?
Yeah.
First thing I would say is the only person that we get to control in the middle of a conflict is us. And that's a hard one because I would want the other person to usually do everything that Jesus calls me to do in the middle of the conflict, right? And so
I'm being like Jesus. Why aren't they?
If they would just, is what I hear a lot.
Yeah.
Well, if they would just listen, and if they would just not fill in the blanks, and if they would just, like want to know my side of things. So I think some of the things that are super helpful, just as immediate handles that God gives us as ways of walking with people, is one, to realize that you have part of the story. Usually, when you're in the middle of the person's side of things that you're clear on is your own.
Yeah.
So, of course, I know why I'm frustrated right now and why I feel blocked. Because a one-word definition of conflict is you feel blocked from something. Respect you think you deserve, a way of doing things, the way you think something should go. And so I'm clear on why I feel blocked. But I have no idea, if I'm honest, why you are reacting and responding the way you're responding. And so that's that idea you just mentioned earlier, Jordan, of like staying confused, which is so hard to do because our natural tendency as humans is to go from I'm in tension to now I've assigned blame. And once we've assigned blame, then we start to look for all the reasons why this person is a problem. And I'm no longer worried about the issue as much. I'm now worried about you being the problem. And if we can stay confused and we can stay with just this is causing tension for us, and then realize that we are meaning makers as humans. So anytime something happens, we naturally tell ourselves a story about why the thing happened. And if we want to be grow in doing conflict well, we have to be careful with the stories we tell ourselves and go, that may not be the right story, but I naturally feel I have to fill in the blanks. That's human nature. I fill in the blank of why you did that thing, why you said that thing, why you used that tone of voice, why you text back with all capital letters. Like, why did you do the thing you did? I know why. I've now filled in the blank.
Yeah, I've Sherlock Holmes this thing, and I've filled in every intention you had.
Yeah. So often I ask people, I'm like, well, did you ask them if that's why they did it? Well, no, I know that's why they did it. You know? And so to be able to walk into things confused, walk into things with grace, assuming the best.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, that's hard to do.
Yeah,
right?
and it doesn't assume that you're not hurt.
No.
You can be hurt and confused.
Hey, that thing happened. Help me understand. It's a great one-liner.
Huge.
And then just zip it. And then your goal is to be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. And we go, well, I'd love someone to do that for me. The gospel says we go first.
Yeah.
And if we can, listening in the middle of a conflict is our superpower. If you enter in with tension, there's a situation that you're frustrated, two people are frustrated with one another, literally just listening and then going, hey, do I understand? Hey, tell me more. I really want to understand. The energy level in the room just goes.
Okay, but if I just listen, that means I can't give you my 10 points of justification or the 5 ways that you wrong me if I'm just supposed to listen.
But what if in that conflict, Melissa, somebody just did that for you?
Yes.
And they said, hey, but I hear what you're saying. Totally.
No, because I
here's what
shouldn't.
it feels like. It feels like death.
Yeah.
Because it is going, oh, no. I think I'm right. And I think that you're wrong. And so to grant for another what you would want done for you, I think Jesus talks about that a little bit.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yes, I know. I'm like, this sounds like turning the other cheek, Dave.
No, I mean, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus kind of sums up the law and the prophets with like, hey, just do for somebody what you would want done for you. Like you can kind of cover a lot of things with that,
Yeah.
And that's what we would want done for us in that moment.
Whether they do it or not. Back.
But it feels like carrying your cross.
Yeah.
Literally feels like dying. But Jesus says, hey, the road to resurrection is death first.
Yeah.
To a resurrected new way of being together. And so if we can do that, right, and we can listen well in that moment, and then usually the golden rule, right, doing for another what we would want done for us, creates a golden opportunity where the other person usually, I won't say always, but usually is like softened and willing then to go, hey, well, tell me your side of things too. I want to understand where you're coming from. Because on a bad day in a conflict, my flesh is talking to your flesh.
Yeah.
So my defensiveness then triggers your defensiveness. But if I can be, the New Testament calls it being hidden in Christ, like sealed in the Spirit. And if I can enter into with you in a Spirit-filled way of being, grace-filled way of being, what I offer to you often brings that back the other way. But if I'm coming in the flesh and I'm triggered, right, by, feeling like a victim and judging you and like all these mindsets that I carry in the flesh, welcome to what I'm probably going to get back on the other end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Staying confused, very difficult, right? I think as a leader, half the time when conflict hits my desk, either on my team or someone on my team is having conflict with someone outside of my things like that, right? Because and just so a listener knows, like church staff, there's just as much conflict there as any other place.
Yeah. Sorry to let you in on that one, but
the hope is that we just do it different, right? And most of the time, my questions are oriented on helping remind people that they don't know that.
They don't know it.
I understand that is how you heard that, But when they said this thing and you got here, there's a ton of space in between that thing and then your conclusion. And it is your duty to then go back and say, like, this is what I heard. Can you help me understand? And it is like very, very difficult.
Oh yeah.
The other day, I actually I asked my wife permission to talk about this, but we got home from life group, and we were like, we'd been bang, bang, bang the whole day with, we did work, practice for our kids' baseball, went to life group. We had sat down on the couch, end of the day. We're both tired. And our sort of code for like, all right, let's wrap it up and go to bed is like, you shower, right? Because she showers first, I shower, we go to bed. She sat down on the couch next to me, and I said, all right, go shower.
Oh, no, you didn't.
And she was like, well, I can sit here too. And I was like, what? Like, what's happening? Like, I don't really know what's happening. So then I was like, why are you talking to me that way? And then she's like, I'm not saying anything. And I was like, aren't you tired? She's like, maybe. And so then it was like, what even just happened? Right? Like, nobody is meaning anything. Nobody, like, there's no real maliciousness behind anything. But in the course of me just dumbly being like, instead of asking the question of like, hey, do you want to like wrap up and go to bed? Like, I'm tired. She sat down hoping like, you know what? I'd like 5 minutes, sweetly, I'd like 5 minutes of time to connect with my husband before we go to bed. And I was like, get out of here.
Okay, perfect example, right? Missed expectation, not a big deal, right? But then what comes out in that moment, in that mixed expectation, is somebody feels triggered in their flesh, right? Throws out a little bit of a zinger. And then on a bad day, what starts to happen between two people is, oh, well, okay, that didn't feel good. It's almost like playing tennis. Somebody hits one over the net, and the other person goes, oh, okay. And they hit one back.
Harder,
and then we hit
a little
one back.
harder, a little
harder,
faster.
harder. And in that moment, it literally takes somebody going, oh my gosh, how did we get here? And then somebody has to let the ball hit the fence. And that's hard to do once the ball starts hitting back and forth a little bit. Somebody has to go, oh, whoa, pause. I'm so sorry. Like, this is not, I thought where this conversation was going to go. Did I say something wrong? Like, help me understand.
Well, so I ended up being that person, and I'm not like the hero of the story, but
Jordan, good job.
Because before that, I said something to the effect of like, why do you have to? I like almost use conflict resolution against her, being like, well, obviously you don't understand me. Why are you talking like that?
Wow, this one really.
Yeah, and then like I told her she was assuming things about me without asking her about what was going on in her, basically.
Yeah.
And then I realized, I was like, oh, okay. Like, in my flesh, I'm doing the pride thing. Yeah. And the way that it ended up happening was she's like, okay, well, I guess I'll go take a shower. And then there's this little pony wall in our bathroom, and I just, while she's in the shower for a second, and I felt like God was like, you dummy. Like, why did you just make your wife feel like that? I went, sat down on the wall, and was like, hey, I feel like I said the wrong thing, and I don't understand. Like, help me understand why you reacted the way you did to what I said. And then it was like, oh. And then it ended with like, okay, I love you. I would never try and hurt you on purpose, But
she didn't dump out all your favorite shampoo.
You're assuming I have my favorite shampoo and I don't just use whatever she buys for me.
But that's beautiful, right? Because that is, you said the word earlier of like owning 100% of our 2%. Jesus says, hey, get the log out of your own eye before you go after the speck in our neighbor's eye. Like, that's a practical example of living out a kingdom way of reconciliation.
Yeah.
On what we would argue on a scale of 1 to 10 was probably a 2
Yes.
when it comes to conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But those can linger. Like literally that kind of a situation can turn into weeks of feeling weird around one another.
Yeah.
If not entered into well. And you went, oh Lord, I feel convicted by your grace. I feel, again, the Spirit tugs on us.
Yeah.
And we go, you know what? I'm going to respond to that. And I'm going to own what I can own. And I'm going to come in vulnerability and ask for forgiveness there.
And real quick, I want to ask a follow-up question because I've been thinking about this, and I think what happened was I intended something else, but I did one thing, and it even landed a different way. The result was different than intent, right? And I've been in several rooms lately where one person is more preoccupied with their intent than the result. And that's actually what creates the deep conflict is, do you ever see people be like, well, I didn't mean it that way. And then, but I think it's perfectly, like the humble heart, the peacemaker would say, well, I think it matters how you meant something, but it also really matters how this person received that thing. And it very much so matters that you hurt a person, even if unintentional. And because people feel like it's untrue to apologize for result rather than intent, right? You want to be understood rather than saying like, oh, wow, I'm so sorry I hurt you.
Yeah.
Can I tell you what I meant?
Yeah.
Or when I said that thing or did that thing.
Because
right?
in my mind, I'm not going to say I'm sorry for how you twisted it and made it something different than it, in my flesh. That's why I don't say sorry. Like, I didn't mean that. You're the one that took it and spiraled it out.
Yeah.
But I think it goes back to, and you just dropped this little line, which we know we're familiar with, own 100% of your 2%. So share what that means, because this was monumental in how I approach conflict now.
Yeah. So I'll answer kind of both of those questions because I think this is huge, is that there's a difference between seeking to fully understand how another person has experienced the conflict that we're a part of. The conflict term for it is bracketing, meaning I can seek to deeply understand where you're coming from, but that doesn't necessarily mean I fully agree with exactly the way that I see the same thing, but I've chosen to put myself in your shoes.
Yeah.
And I've chosen to deeply and fully understand, and to the point where the other person could go, I think you get it. That is different from like owning all of it. Because I think when people get in conflict, they get really stuck on those kind of things of like, that's not what I did, or that's not what I intended. And if understanding means I have to agree with you fully, then I'm not even going to seek to understand, because we're talking on different planets.
Yes.
Like we are looking at this from two different angles and lenses. And the reality is in every conflict, people are looking from multiple different angles. And the challenge is, and the challenge I would give to that person you're talking about, Jordan, is to go, you've got to get really serious about understanding the other person's picture. You got your own picture of conflict really clear right now, and your point of view. Can you get as serious about trying to understand theirs? Doesn't mean you agree with it all, but can you get serious? Because as you do that, that is love. That's putting yourself in another person's shoes. And then from there, sometimes you realize, oh, there's more here for me to own than I thought. Sometimes not. But as you do that, the Lord always goes, hey, let's start with what you can own. And that's that 100% of your 2%, is that anytime there's interpersonal conflict, there's at least a little bit of it that's mine. Usually we think it's like 98% the other person's fault.
Yeah.
And like maybe a little bit mine. And Jesus always goes, great. Well, let's start with your little bit.
Get the little
Take
bit.
yours
Yep.
more seriously.
Whatever your little bit is, because it's very clear to see the log in the other person's eye than it is to go, or the speck in the other person's eye, rather than to realize, oh, I got a little bit of a plank in mine. Jesus is like, great, let's start with your plank.
Yeah.
Let's start with what's there. And then, we can address what's there with the other person. But there's a place of like humbleness and humility that grows in us that I think is just such a kingdom thing that Jesus knew, that if I can own my stuff, I will enter in different and more gracefully in dealing with the speck in your eye, realizing I got some plank in my eye.
It's also just immediately diffusing.
Yeah.
100%. I tell every leader when we're entering into a conflict with, say, a participant region or a leader that we walk with or whatever, I'm like, hey, find anything and everything that is yours to own and lead with it. We call it leading with the log. Hey, if you can lead with the log in your own eye, you immediately diffuse and create an opportunity for just a grace-filled conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen it a million different times in my own life, and then in the people I've walked alongside of, is like when you are vulnerable enough. I mean, it communicates so many things in subtext, which is like, I've thought about this. I've given myself the opportunity to reflect on what my part is. I don't think everything's your fault, right? But then it also is just true, where that like there is a tiny sliver of 100% victim type of things that happen in this world.
That'd be like my car got broken into.
Yeah.
You know, like or abuse.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of ones.
Yeah.
But anytime it's like a back and
Interpersonal.
forth interpersonal, usually there's
Yeah. One of the building blocks that I communicated to that leader that I talked to was to keep the circle small and to be careful not to build camps. The things you've said to me. What do those things mean?
Yeah, keep the circle small is, you know, we have a tendency to talk about people and not to people. And, you know, even in like leadership settings, it's way more safe. Say I have a conflict with somebody in my life group. It's way more safe to like make a general statement of like, you know, we all need to be on time to life group, you know, or hey, we should all do the curriculum we've agreed to do. Right? When I'm really thinking about one person that I want to have this conversation with, but it's way safer to like blanket it out. And to keep the circle small means, go address the one. It's Matthew 18. It's like, hey, go to your brother or sister first. If you get stuck, yeah, we can widen the circle from there, but it honors that person. And to pull them away from other folks as you address whatever the thing is, that's not loving. So nobody wants to like have a conflict addressed in front of their friends or in front of others. That immediately is going to put somebody on the defensive. So pull someone aside lovingly. Think about the setting. Think about how you would want somebody to address a conflict with you. Do for another what you would want them done for you. Knowing that, again, there's time to widen the circle, but it's not the starting point to do it that way. So, and then the second piece, I'm trying to remember what you said.
Not building camps.
Oh yeah, not building camps. Our human
They're
nature,
kind of connected.
Triangulation is a word in conflict which says it's that water cooler. It's the talk about versus talk to. In a social setting, our natural tendency when we deal with conflict in the flesh is to go from being directly addressing a person to, you know, again, starting to blame the person. But then as we start to blame the person, we've got all this ammo against them. This is keeping a record of wrongs. This is what scriptures talk about. And then once we've got that record of wrongs, I now need people on my team to also see the other person as crazy.
Yeah.
And so then I'll start to leak it out as prayer requests, you know, like, hey, will you really just pray for me? So-and-so's been really hard in my life. And my wife is this and this and this and this. Don't you agree with me? And so we start to need people to affirm the way we see this other person as bad. And, you know, usually the other person's doing the same thing. And on a bad day, if that extends, I mean, that's how life groups fracture. That's how churches split. That's how families stop showing up to family gatherings. Half take this side, half take that side. It's human nature and the flesh gone really bad.
When I'm doing that, I want to justify again. I was right, but it actually justifies my hardened heart.
I'm just seeking advice.
Keeps me hardened towards. Yeah, I'm just seeking advice that you're going to tell me what I did was right and what I feel is right. And me withholding from that person is okay because they were so wrong. And it's just keeping my heart hard towards that person rather than those that you go to. Dave Obwald, who will say, well.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where we as Christian friends for people, as people come to us with things like that, we have to have a lens on how do I love this person well, knowing that they're hurting, knowing that they're in the middle of a conflict, which is difficult. But at the same time, to be able to have the lens of, all right, how do I be a peacemaker in this moment and not become part of that taking camps? I don't want to be a part of a person's camp.
Yeah.
And so to be able to go, hey, it sounds like you have a conflict that you're in the middle of. How do I help you address it?
Yeah, we have this really annoying phrase that can make you unpopular on staff, but it's like you can hear someone out, but saying like, all right, well, have you talked to them about that?
Mm-hmm.
Or something to the effect of like, when are you going to talk to them about that? Like, I'd love to help keep you accountable to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we're at our best, that's what we do.
Yeah.
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 But I think this is a very common thing. I mean, I see this like in student ministries. It's like, this is most conflicts,
Totally.
which is friend group, right? You say, I even talked to a student yesterday who was saying she had a hard week at school, and that was because what was the mechanics of it? It was a girl in this group talked poorly, not about her, but her friends.
Oh man.
And then she had iced her out. And then now it's like groups are enemies. We don't talk to each other. And we actually talk a lot about each other, but we don't talk to each other. And, we had a good conversation about it. But it's just that's like sort of a microcosm in high school of just what we do all the time.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll say something. So I do, we train our mentors with regeneration about monthly. And I said something at mentor training last week where I said, I hope the person you're mentoring through Regen this year has a conflict. They all kind of looked at me sideways and they're like, what are you talking about? I said, because we get reformed in community. And most of the people that you're walking with who are in regeneration never had conflict modeled for them in a healthy way, healthy biblical way growing up. And they're probably a part of whatever marriage, whatever family right now. And it's probably not great right now in the way that they deal with conflict. And so the hope would be that they would experience a conflict so that you can walk with them in a biblical way. We'll have them walk through our conflict field guide and guide them through that. Look at Jesus' way of doing this. And you can walk in a restorative way and in a way that maybe they can see conflict through a whole different lens. What a gift that would be for them this year. And so when I think of that high school student, I go, oh man, what a gift that maybe, just maybe, they're walking with a leader who might challenge them in a different way to see the gospel as a part of that. To not shy away from that, because you know what? That student's going to keep doing conflict the same way until there is a crisis moment where maybe, just maybe, the gospel intersects there differently and they see, oh man, we could do this different. And so what a gift and opportunity.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important principles that has been a game changer for me is that idea that like it's possible to make the issue and not the person.
Yeah.
And that a subcategory of that is that conflict is spiritual, and that Scripture teaches us that our battle is not with flesh and blood, meaning another person, but with the powers and principalities. And what I see in ministry often is people who focus on each other are ineffective in mission. And so, like, Satan would love nothing more than for us to just keep fighting with each other and never think about those who we've been called to reach. And so, like, the profoundly spiritual aspect of conflict, how do you see those things like intersecting, or in what ways do you feel like it's this sort of spiritual formation in order to focus on the issue, not the person?
I mean, I think, in some ways said well, like, the catchphrase I use there is we want to be soft on people and hard on issues. And issues can divide. Song of Solomon talks about these foxes in the garden that can ruin what is there, right? The little foxes, catch the little foxes, right? Those are issues, right? In a friendship, in a marriage, in a team or whatever, you have to address the little foxes. But the little foxes are issues. They're not the people being the problem. And as we grow in an understanding of seeing people as image bearers, not problems, as we enter in with, because our natural tendency is when we start to label someone as the problem, we take away their image bearing, the way we view them. We start to view them as enemies. We start to view them as things that are discardable. And
Yeah, not even worth the effort of
Right.
resolving conflict.
or we start to label them as less than, right? They're not even, I always put myself on the high ground and them on the low ground, right?
I wouldn't debase
If they were
myself,
following
yeah.
Jesus, then, and we start to like question people's faith. We start to question how they do things. And so we have to keep this high value and view of people. And then even the way Jesus talks about love, he says the highest form of love is actually love of God and love of enemy. And he says, okay, well, I'll challenge you. This person you're in conflict with feels like an enemy. Great. The way of following me is actually to esteem them and love them as someone who has worth, even when they feel like an enemy. Because everyone who's been in conflict or in relationship with someone more than a year or whatever, they're going to feel like an enemy at times. My spouse, as much as I love Erin, there's times where she feels like an enemy of mine. And God always challenges us towards, okay, great. And will you learn to love even someone who feels challenging? That's the way of the gospel. That's the way of following me. Because that's what Jesus did for us. While we were still enemies of his, while we were still turning another direction, he pursued, he loved, he initiated on our behalf. That's when we're learning to live like our Savior, is when we can do that.
Yeah, and as you talked about this being spiritual warfare, I was thinking too, as you were sharing, the way we can enter into conflict like this takes humility. How do you get humility? Abiding, connecting to the Spirit, right? This kind of view and perspective and obedience in conflict only comes when it's Spirit empowered too. So as we connect to God, we're able to see people differently and go after the issue as opposed to the other way around, right? Did I say that right? Or did I say that opposite?
Right. Yeah.
You done good.
Okay,
No.
okay, yeah. Go after the issue, not the person. That's what I meant to say. Yeah. Through the Spirit, yeah.
So huge. And if we can start to recognize that what it feels like when we're not abiding in Christ, like if you can start to get clear of what we'd call them our ditches in conflict, right? Or our fleshly bents, that's like the non-abiding self. And if we can recognize like, oh geez, like that's where I'm at right now, the first movement isn't towards the person. The first movement is towards Christ. Lord, would you change my heart? Like all I can see is judgment towards this person. God, all I can see is the desire to avoid. All I can see is the desire to just control them and like make them see it my way. I need help. And Lord, would you change my heart and my mind? And as he changes our heart and our mind, all kinds of new things bubble up in us, right? Empathy, the ability to see the world through another person's eyes, right? And to have empathy for their situation, not just my own situation, right? The creativity and curiosity come, right? The ability to think through, not just my way, but maybe our way. All that stuff is gifts of the Spirit, not gifts of our flesh. And so to your point, the first movement is towards Christ in any of these.
Yeah, another thing a mentor said around that was viewing people not as the enemy, but victims of the enemy. So they've got someone in their
They're
ear.
hijacked too. Yep.
And so when you can see it that way, that, oh, wait a minute.
It creates compassion. Yeah.
Yeah, different level of entering in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you can see someone as hijacked by their flesh or hijacked by, just like I do, I get hijacked by my flesh, right? And they're just operating out of the natural human nature that's in them. Yeah, a whole lot more compassion comes out.
Man. Well, I feel like this is like in a deep well. And so I think, we may even call you back for some case studies.
That'd be fun.
But I really appreciate this, man. And if somebody's listening right now, and when we say conflict, like everybody's thinking of something, what would you just, speak to them right now as sort of like an encouragement as we're closing up here?
I think I'd probably say get the conflict in your head, in your mind right now, like literally pause the podcast and just think of what's the current one. And then if you can take that mindset with Christ, like, Lord, what's the gift and opportunity here? Lord, help me see this as a potential gift and opportunity. And then a number of the things that we talked about can flow out of that. But that perspective alone starts to move in a whole different direction in our souls. If it doesn't just get labeled as bad, but it gets labeled as, okay, in the kingdom, this is a whole nother way of seeing this thing. So that's what I'd say.
That's good.
That's great. Well, thanks for joining us, Dave.
Yeah, gift
Always
to be here.
Appreciate it. And, you as listeners, we'd We hope that you gathered a lot from this. Is there any like resources or anything that you would point people to that you think, even if they're like, wow, this is very interesting, I'd like to dive in a little bit?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier the book, The Peacemaker Ministries is really great. We have on our website under the life group section, resources, there's a conflict field guide, which we refer a lot of our leaders to. It's like a 4-page little PDF deal, which just walks through like, here's God's heart for conflict. And you could take a conflict you're in and just walk through step by step. Hey, how's my heart doing in this? And here's next steps and possibilities. I think those are 2 really accessible, easy resources to start with.
It's great. Oh, thanks, Dave. Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
And, listeners, if this was helpful for you, please don't send this podcast to the person that you're having conflict with. Use it as a resource for yourself.
You're the only person you can control that conflict.
Hey, you really need to figure this
listen
stuff
to
out.
this.
Yeah. But if you think it would be valuable for someone who you know and love, send it to them.
Yeah.
And use this as a resource. And if you can, please subscribe to the podcast, share it, and it really helps us reach more people.
Yep.
So thanks again, Dave. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the WellCast. As always, don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends about us. For more information about the Well Community Church, visit thewellcommunity.org.